Crimson were a progressive rock band from England. They started in 1968, and many people claim that they actually kicked off the whole progressive rock thing with their first album called In the Course of the Crimson King. To say that they've been influential in prog rock is a bit of an understatement. They've been active in short bursts over the years in various lineups. Guitarist Robert Fripp has been the central driving force for from somewhere in the early 70s. And they've constantly reinvented themselves over the years and pushed the boundaries of music in interesting and challenging ways. Also, occasionally challenging the concept of what it means to be a band. So, for a while, they were a loose collaboration of subgroups called projects. For a while, they had a three-drum kit front line. Um, and yeah, they did all sorts of interesting things. So while you can definitely hear the influence of other bands and of particular genres and musical styles in their music, they have always been leaders rather than followers. They're one of the most progressive of progressive rock bands. They have released, I believe, 13 studio albums. They are currently thought to be at an end and are no more, but it's not entirely clear whether that's going to be true forever. Hi, my name's Dan. So this is a review that I actually promised at the end of one of my reviews kind of a week or so ago, and then it seemed to kind of get forgotten. So I'm doing it. I'm doing it now. The fact that it didn't go where I thought it was going to go isn't important because although most of the reviews on this channel are of the 3,000 greatest albums of all time, according to a list, acclaimed music, and I am working my way through from the bottom to the top, very nearly towards a third of the way through, starting from the first 1,000. So all those reviews, the order is important as I'm doing in them as a countdown, effectively. But occasionally I step off that list, and this is one of those, so the ordering here isn't important. I have several things that I do stepping off. One of them is new releases sometimes, if something kind of piques my interest. One of them is request reviews, and if you want to request me doing a review of an album, I'll never make any promises, but if you leave a comment on any of the videos on this channel, you can request a review, and I've done almost all of the ones that I've been requested of. And then I have ones that I call criminally missing. So that's albums that I think really, really should be in this list of 3,000 greatest albums of all time. I have lists. I have a category that I call hidden gems, which is ones that wouldn't be on this list because they're not well known enough, but they're ones that I've encountered and have enjoyed particularly. And then I felt the need to have a third category, which is kind of between those two extremes, albums that are somewhat known, but I just want to review, and they don't fit as they're not really well known enough to be on the list, and they're not really hidden enough to be hidden gems, but they're albums that I enjoy. This is one of those, and I call these dance picks. Right, that's all that preamble over. Let's actually get into the review. So this is the 10th studio album by King Crimson. I've heard this many times. It's one of my go-to albums. I've got quite a lot of those, to be fair, but it is one that's had quite a few plays. My history with this, so it's probably, I think, the summer of 1984, while I'm a student. My local record shop used to sell off singles cheap. Now, I can't remember whether this single was one that I got in a sealed bag of 5 singles for 25 pence, so 5 pence a single. I couldn't resist those lucky dip bags. And it might have been one of those. So it might have been one that they had like they had a rack of ones that they hadn't been able to sell at kind of an old price, and they so reduced the price quite a lot. Anyway, regardless of which, I picked up a copy of the only single off this album, which was called Sleepless, which is a track on this album. The backside was Nuage, which is another track of this album. So my knowledge of King Crimson, I did know of King Crimson before this, was from the album In the Course of the Crimson King, which is probably, almost certainly, their best known album. They released it in 1969, and it is widely credited as being the kickstart of progressive rock. I was introduced to it a couple of years before this point in time, 1984, so it'd be about 1982, 1981 maybe. I think it must have been 82, um, by a school friend who introduced me to a lot of progressive rock at that point. And so I thought, okay, King Crimson, I know what that's like from this. And then I played it, and it was completely different from what I expected it to be. But I liked it. And it wasn't long before I picked up a cassette copy of the album. Now, at this point in time, I had a Walkman, and so I was favouring at times cassettes over other formats, well, the other format being LPs, because I could actually listen to it whilst I was walking back. And I still remember probably my first listen to this, walking on the streets of Salford, where I was at university, and listening to it, and it blew me away. Right. Now, a long time later on, I know that it's regarded as one of the weaker King Crimson albums, but I really like it, which is why I've decided I'm going to review it. I think now, and not then, I do probably prefer the album Discipline, which was from around the same time, but that gets itself on lists like this, and Through the Perfect Pair doesn't. So this is, to my mind, an underrated album. Um, but I will confess there may be that familiarity is talking here. So at this point, King Crimson, Robert Fripp, who's kind of the driving force, a guy called Adrian Bellew on guitar and vocals, um, Tony Levin on bass, who is one of my favourite ever bassists. I'll come back to the bass a bit later on. And Bill Bruford on drums, and Bill Bruford had played in Yes. And both Tony Levin and Bill Bruford were all over progressive rock, and Tony Levin still is. I don't know what's happened to Bill Bruford, but Tony Levin has been an absolute driving force for bass in progressive rock. Side one of this album is mostly songs, has one instrumental track, which is the last track, which is the track Nuage, which was on the B side of the single that I got. Side two is mostly experimental improvised instrumentals, but it has one vocal track in it, which is I'm just looking for the name of that. It's just I've lost it from the top of my head. So I'm going to have to go to my player for that. Dig Me. Um, Generally, this is considered to be prog rock, but I think that that's mostly well, it is progressive, but it doesn't hit the kind of norms of where progressive rock was at this point in time, or had been, or where it was going. Because by now, King Crimson had gone off in their own progressive direction, which to my mind makes them truly progressive in that they're pushing the boundaries and trying new stuff. My one criticism I have of modern prog rock, and there's quite a lot of really good stuff around, is that it's not progressive anymore. It doesn't push boundaries. Other genres are doing that. So the sound here is quite spiky and percussive at times. It reminds me in kind of feel and vibe at times of Talking Heads and David Bowie of around this time, maybe a little earlier. It's all about textures. We do have at times odd time signatures. We have more of that in the experimental stuff, the second half. We have unusual approaches to harmony and musical structures at time. I want to particularly pull out the start of the very last track, which is Lark's Tongues in Aspic, part something, part three, which has just got a very typical guitar, typical of King Crimson kind of guitar stuff going on, which is really complicated and it's got some weird musical stuff going on in it. It's very intricate. The highlight for the second half for me is Industry, which is a track that starts with a simple pulse, then builds up using discordant instruments. Noise is that a dentist drill. There's a ticking of what might be a grandfather clock. Things are out of time with each other. They're in different keys. And in some ways, it's similar to some free jazz. Now, I review these albums or record these albums in a batch. And earlier in this batch, I did a Sun Ra album. There's some similarities to Sun Ra, but I didn't like the Sun Ra. I like this a lot more. It's got kind of industrial aesthetic, and it's quite a rush. And at that time, I didn't really understand or know what King Crimson were doing, but they were basically they had the format that they would improvise within, and this is one of the things within that format. Dig Me, as I said, is on the second side is the one song in there. Most of that is spoken word elements, which is semi poetic, backed by kind of very chaotic musical stuff or instrumental stuff. Then that resolves into much more conventional music for the choruses with singing in it. The songs are about, right, well, I've never really worked that out despite many listens. They have kind of quite a surrealist approach to lyrics at times. Except maybe Man with an Open Heart, which to me seems to be talking about regrets of being emotionally closed. Otherwise, yeah, not really sure, but interesting, certainly. Now, in retrospect, it does sound very 80s, mostly because of the sounds that are used, especially the synth sounds. The bass sounds I find particularly interesting because I listen to bass because I play bass. There's a normal bass. There's a Chapman stick, which is a kind of upright bass thing that has more strings and is done by hammer-ons, which so that's quite percussive. And there's Tony Levin's dowel fingers. So he did this thing. Again, I didn't know how he produced the sound at that point, but he stuck bits of wooden dowel, somehow fixed them to the end of his fingers and used them to go tick, 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 fast and very percussive bass sound. And it's an amazing sound. I've had the privilege of seeing him live doing this, and it's just wonderful to watch. So overall, obviously I liked it. It's an interesting album. It's maybe more head music than heart music or feet music. But I'd say it's not exactly beautiful, but it's still an attractive aesthetic. In the same way that brutalist architecture is not something you'd say is beautiful, but it has a certain aesthetic to it that some people have kind of gone, yeah, there's something there that's interesting and almost attractive in its own right. So that's a whole other exploration of this album because it's an album that I enjoy, and I would love to know what you think of it. So if you've listened to it, please do tell me what you think. If you haven't listened to it, why not go and have a listen and then tell me what you think by leaving me a comment? Now, I suspect that this is one of those occasions where I'm going to like it more than other people. And I'm quite happy for that to happen. Please do disagree with me. I love reading people's comments. And that's it from me for now.